Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the India Impact Communication Conclave, the Women's Day Special, presented by Comms News and powered by Reputation Today. In case you're posting on social media, the hashtag for today is hashtag IICC 2022. That's IICC 2022. In case you want to catch these 5 sessions later, subscribe to and visit our YouTube channel at bit.ly RT on YT. Without further ado, let's head straight to the first panel discussion of the day. Joining us for a discussion on gender equality today for a better tomorrow are panelists Dhruti Kapadia Krishnan, Global Communications Partner at INGKA Services, Dimple Kapur, VP and Head of Communications at Pernod, India, Poonam Thakur, Head of Communications for India and Southeast Asia at Prosus Ventures, and Shreya Sharma, Head of Communications at ShareChat. Moderating the panel discussion today is Shreya Krishnan, SVP and Head of Marketing and Communications at Aon India. Over to you, Shreya, now.
Okay, so the topic for today is gender equality today for a better tomorrow. Let's be honest, no matter what women tend to have achieved in the last many years of trying to get to a space of equality, equity, social justice, equality continue to be talking points because we're not there yet. The gaps are really far away. India is going to take another 140 years to even reach true equality in any form. So that context in the background, I think I'll open this up for everybody for their opening thoughts. So Dimple, I'll start with you, and then Poonam and Shreya, and we'll wait for Dhruti to join in as well. But Dimple, over to you. We'll begin with you.
Great, thank you, Shreya, and very pleased to be part of this discussion. I think, no better time than now. It's been a burning issue for a while, but only now you see everyone really making strides to actually address this issue, but not just address it, but do something for it. So first of all, good afternoon to everyone that's joined in, and good afternoon to my co-panelists and to Shreya, our anchor. Very pleased to be part of the conversation. Like I said, it's not a binary issue anymore. It is, gender equality across the spectrum. So looking forward to the discussions, and thank you.
Poonam, over to you. Thank you, Dimple. We'll come back to you on the binary piece.
Yes.
Thanks, Shreya, and hello, everyone. Like my co-panelist already said, this is a burning issue, and it's the most topical thing today. To what Shreya said, the gender gap is actually not just in India; it's a global gender gap, which will now take 135 years to close. I mean, let that sink in. And just in the last 1 year, that gap has grown by a generation because of the pandemic. So I think I would also like to use this opportunity today to explore how the pandemic has, pushed this conversation forward, because I think a lot of people saw how much of an unequal load there was on women, especially with everyone working from home. It is nonetheless also translated into those very women, facing real burnout, and 1 in 4 actually wanting to downshift their careers. So I think that's not a very positive note to start on, but it's really something I think we should, discuss ideas and thoughts about how we can make it better.
Absolutely poignant thought, not pleasant, not pretty, but absolutely something that we need to focus on today. Shreya, switching gears to you and asking you to weigh in on this one.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm happy to be here and discuss different point of views around gender equality. And I would obviously like to take a slightly positive spin here. I believe that with the growing social media and internet and connectivity, there is growing awareness. We are on this platform at this moment talking about it, addressing those issues. So I do see a glimmer of hope and change that is around the corner. Of course, we all have to come together and do it, not just women, but men as well, to achieve the equilibrium that we're looking for. So, yeah.
Equilibrium is a beautiful word, and I like what you said. This is not a dialogue for women alone, but the men need to be brought in. I'm just quickly checking to see if Dhruti is in the room, and if someone can give me an indication if she's in, because then we'll get her opening comments and move into the first round of questions. Somebody backstage. Okay, moving ahead. So we'll come to the binary thought that Dimple started with. Gender is non-binary. Today, there are 26 recognized genders that exist. And let's be honest, all said and done, the masculine gender seems to have always had an edge, whether it's conditioning, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's the way the world has behaved for so very long. But when you look at women and other minority genders, they continue to be at the receiving end of several forms of bias. And those kind of biases are dictating in some form the world that we're in. And to change that narrative, to make it more diverse and inclusive, what is it that we can do? So Dimple, I'll start with you because the binary piece comes in there. So
Sure. So I think there's a very interesting piece of data that was put together, basis a McKinsey survey that says that the more diverse the organization, the better. There's a stronger positive financial outcome, right? Now, if that is a fact that, diversity brings in diverse perspectives. Hello, Dhruti.
Hello.
welcome, Dhruti.
I can take a pause if you'd like to introduce Dhruti.
No, I think you had just started on the thought. Then I'll come to Dhruti and I'll move the question to her. She can give her opening comments and respond on the question.
Okay, done. Okay. So like I was saying, basis the McKinsey survey, which says that, financial outcomes are significantly impacted and in the positive due to diversity. And what does diversity really mean? It's not just a binary conversation. Of course, there's women. There's lots more to even bring women into the workforce, right? 50% gender diversity, when we talk about it, it largely depends on, rests with women representation. But I think there's so much more that organizations need to do. And even as a society, whether we make places more inclusive, spaces more inclusive, whether, there's infrastructure, whether there's policies. So yes, there's so much more that we need to do beyond just the women issue. Women itself is a first step, but I think there's been enough conversations that have started on the women inclusion bit. But really, inclusion is a choice where we, Thibu Kyuni, our MD and CEO, recently made a statement, and I'm going to steal that from him. He said, inclusion is a choice that we make to accept diversity, as well as to make the world a better place to be in for all of us, right? So going forward from that thought, how do we maximize each one's potential, not just economically, but also as a society? I think there's so much more, and they've just been isolated, and it's only now that we're beginning to see how we can actually, enhance financial, economic, social dialogues and outcomes.
Absolutely. Dimple, thank you so much. I think there were some really insightful pieces there, especially about how you look at diversity in context of inclusion. So Dhruti, moving to you, your opening comments on the topic and talking about diversity and inclusion in context of gender.
So I think, thank you very much. Just a quick introduction. I'm Dhruti, Kapadia Krishnan. My name itself is quite diverse because I am a Gujarati, born and brought up in Bangalore, but married to a Tamilian, born and brought up in Calcutta. But having said that, I think, thank you so much. I think this whole aspect of diversity and really the future, I think as a theme really, and this is the first discussion. So I think the overall theme this year is really breaking the bias. I think there is still a disconnect between the biases we aim to break and the biases that the system allows us to break. And I think we have a lot of discussions that, keep coming, diverse perspectives, but sometimes the answers, get limited. I do believe that there is a paradigm shift that's needed, and I'm happy to be part of this discussion and hear more from the rest of the panel as well. Over to you, Shreya.
Thanks, Dhruti. Again, some interesting anecdotal references, hopefully from you as we go along, because we've had this conversation before. Poonam, moving and switching gears to you. In context of diversity and inclusion and the way the world is currently designed, you spoke very powerfully about that divide that continues to exist. So if you can talk a little bit about what it is that can be looked at in this context.
I think there's so much to do, right? But at the very beginning, and we talked about this yesterday. I think just the fact that we acknowledge that gender is non-binary, it's very heartening, because at the end of the day, we want to break the bias and we want to make this an inclusive space and an inclusive discussion. And just paraphrasing Gloria Steinem, when she said that the struggle for women's rights for equality, and I'm paraphrasing, is not just a struggle for a feminist, or it doesn't belong just to feminism or to an organization, but it's the effort of anyone who cares about human rights. And that's what it basically boils down to. So when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about giving everybody a seat at the table, a voice in the room, it's about acknowledging their agency, it's about acknowledging their choice. And so just to start with, to acknowledge that there is this bias, there is a gap, and then start talking about what are some of the affirmative actions that we can take, what are some of the what are some of the processes that we can put into place at a personal level, at an individual, and at an organizational, and hopefully then at a societal level, that will bring about transformational change. Because I think one thing is very clear, there is urgent action required, and that action has to be now, and it cannot be incremental, it has to be transformational.
Absolutely. Choice, change, transformation, some really agency, some really powerful words in there, really cheering us and edging us towards that change that we really want to see and be. Shreya, you did have a positive spin on this one. So looking forward to hearing from you. What are those things that make you feel like we're on that verge of that transformation?
So I think I have been working in startup space more so, and I've been in large corporates. I've been in a different industry before being in communications. And to be honest, I am seeing change. I am seeing open conversations on the subject. Women also being considered. Of course, I'm not saying it is large scale yet or mainstream. But I do see organizations, especially new age organizations, taking a step towards it. Currently, the whole corporate system is designed not for diverse genders, right? It is very cut and cold, So there is need for softness, for diversity to come in. And I'm seeing the change happen slowly and steadily, where people are introducing, or corporates or organizations are introducing level playing field for everyone, right? Like all genders or everyone has different needs. And if you really want to judge someone on their meritocracy, you need to bring them to a level together. But that level, everybody needs different things.
Even sorry, something went wrong. Try again in a few seconds.
There's some disturbance, but
even some background noise. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, something happened. So even for women, now, for example, I think there are different stages where women then are considered as a shrinking employee, especially when they get married, if they're pregnant, or they are rearing a child. That perception about women needs to be changed. And of course, women ourselves can build that change or bring about that change. Of course, like I said, with support of family, with support of our colleagues, we can make that.
Interestingly, I used to have a retort to this one when I was pregnant and somebody asked me about leave or something like that. I said, you do realize it's only my uterus that's pregnant. My brains are still working. Like my faculties are all functioning. So I bring that back into this conversation. But having said that, Dimple, you spoke about what efforts can we put in to make, see that it starts with yes, inclusion, but do we have enough diversity? What do we do to ensure that it's more diverse? What do we do that workplaces are more diverse? You spoke about that, so we'll start with that on you, and then we'll go around in the circle again.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So I think, even before we get to what can be done, I think let's look at reality, right? If you look at a stock check and say, where are we? Yes, women representation still underwhelming in the workforce. And even if it's at the workforce, it's really a figure that people are striving towards, right? So very few organizations can claim that they have very strong women leaders at the organization, right? So at leadership level, you certainly need to do more. Whilst most companies, even society, is looking at more inclusive measures where girls and women are concerned, but I think we need to go beyond just numbers, right? Now look at pay parity. Are we there? Certainly not. Is there an unconscious bias when women speak? Certainly yes. And I think very few organizations, so we speak about all of this, right? It's all women empowerment and stuff, but what are we doing to bring awareness on how to deal with this as a society as a whole? It's not just a woman's problem, it's also a man's problem. So also sensitizing other genders, and it's not just a man woman. Like I said, the gender equality spreads across diverse genders. And so whether it's a trans community, whether it's gender diverse, whether it's man, woman, everyone, actually gender equality is everyone's responsibility. It isn't something that you create policies for, create infrastructure, but then if no one's going to bring in the inclusivity in conversations and workplaces and in society as a whole, it's all going to be just on paper. So I think much more needs to be done at a societal level. And of course, for people like us that have a voice, and organizations, forward-looking, progressive organizations are making headway towards this. So whether, like I said, whether it's policies that are more inclusive of the third gender, and saying, yes, can we include it to your partner irrespective of what gender your partner is? Can we create more spaces within both workspaces as well as society that is more inclusive, right? Do we have separate washrooms? Can we make ease of access? If you have a disability, walking in cities like Mumbai, in Bangalore, in Delhi is a challenge, because you don't have pedestrian walks, and even if they are, they're all cobbled and they're broken. So even as an infrastructure, when you look at it, so much more needs to be done. And also, I think if you have to foster a culture of inclusivity, the first step really is to acknowledge that there are diverse genders that need to be part of those conversations and constructs. So I think really the first one is to acknowledge that they have an equal right to be where you are and where you have access, both to resources as well as to opportunities.
Absolutely, bring that conversation more mainstream. And what you said brought up an anecdote, which is an interesting one. There are more CEOs named John than there are women CEOs in the world. So that never stops making me feel mind boggled, really. So thank you, Dimple, because you spoke about societal change, policy change, infrastructure support. Comes to looking at making workplaces more diverse, more inclusive. Dhruti, passing the baton to you.
Sorry. I think I went on mute probably. So I think taking off from what Dimple said, I think one is acknowledging, but I think somewhere we are quite a society where if it's rewarded and recognized, I think that really creates inspiration, and this inspiration or aspiration also then sometimes leads to action. So here's an interesting thing that I read recently, where clients were sometime asking their agencies to share their diversity credentials during a pitch process or an RFP process. And I was wondering whether is this really a valuable way to elevate a well-meaning conversation into action, because this is something probably that people have never really thought about. So can this something if something like this was to come about, would that really help to make the benefits more tangible? And will that really help diversity become a real focus? I think then, another point that I just also wanted to make, I think, I have formerly worked with an organization where about 70 or 80% of its customers were women. And, to be able to really have a bright future, the organization did a lot in terms of trying to be able to break stereotypes, not just as part of its advertising campaigns, but also internally. And I probably will share some ideas in terms of what the organization used to do internally as part of their overall equality, diversity, and inclusivity agenda. So we had, forums, and I'm just getting a little bit more into tactics or programs that we used to have, and very well, coined programs. So we had something called Time to Talk, where, people from both genders would really come into a forum and be able to just share what is it that was, probably on their mind. So it was just an open forum, time to talk, with just a few outlines. I think a women mentor network definitely goes a long way as well, to be able to ensure that you don't just remind, but you also reinforce. And then I think another one, and I know Shreya, you do quite, Shreya Krishnan, I know you do a lot of it in this space, is really a she for she network, where you have women who are probably more experienced, people who've also had similar experiences, being able to be there for one another and support. So on that note, I'd probably like to hand it back to you, Shreya, because I'm sure you.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is the anecdotal references I was referring to, Dhruti. Thank you for bringing that up. If you notice, there are things that we can do within our own spaces, our own circles of influence, that can really have, while the impact may be at a micro level, it can have like a domino effect, and that really helps. Poonam, switching over to you, it's the same question. How do we do this? What is it that we can do at our level, at organizational levels, to look at diversity and inclusion in a more holistic manner?
Sure. I'd love to share a few personal anecdotes as well, but just wanting to make a reference to what Dimple said, and initially what you talked about. And this is just a thought from what we did at one of my former employers, which is a large global multinational corporation. We always talk about it as diversity and inclusion, but at some point in time they did this whole focus group and internal exercise, and they decided to switch it back, because they said you have to be inclusive first in order to then make a case for that diversity and actually see it in action. So I think that is also something that I'm now wired to, to sort of put inclusion before diversity. But of course, both of them sort of, it's chicken and egg, go hand in hand. I think the important thing, and just from that example that we can see, is that there has to be intent, and then you have to transform that into action. And I mean, a lot of us will talk, and I can share more about at an organizational level, but I think at a personal level, what I think, what we can do, be an ally. And this is not just for women. This is especially also for men, because as a woman, you need to be an ally, and you also need to be an advocate. Dimple spoke about pay parity, which is so true, and we've seen it in our own experience personally. And then when you start managing teams and you see how that pay parity works, you see how women colleagues are probably a little more hesitant and unsure about how to have those conversations. So push them to understand their salary structure, teach them to negotiate harder, negotiate smarter, and encourage them towards a work-life balance. Because when you do that, and then that is not just, again, this is then gender agnostic. You just build a better, more personable workspace, and it works both for men and women. Personally, I think, show up to place. I mean, it's not just, representation matters. And I think, especially for me, it's been like this evolution, because when you start off early, you think of things as tokenism, and then you experience more, you read more, you learn more. And especially being in communications, right? We know the impact of visual communications. We know the impact of transformational communications. And therefore, I feel representation is huge. And organizations sort of need to build those platforms in whatever way that suits their initiatives. Secondly, I feel that there is an opportunity to put KPIs in place. We all talk about what gets measured gets done. So how do you put in measures of identifying the success of your inclusion and diversity programs, then institute processes and make it important to everyone? I think when you make it the leadership team's goals, then you sort of make sure that top down you're sort of percolating and that change is really coming through. Yeah, so I don't think I got into too many personal anecdotes, but we can come back to that if you'd like to later.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, but I think I'll highlight the two bits that really stood out for me. One was, of course, advocate it, right? Because you can. And two is, of course, what you said, it has to be top down and it has to be inclusive first. You can have diverse workplaces without inclusion and it's going to bomb. Connecting it to what Dimple had said about, ensuring that diverse workplaces function the way they're supposed to, so they can bring in the kind of performance that they are slated to bring in. Shreya, moving over to you again and getting your perspectives on this, and then we'll circle back.
Sure. From a personal anecdote perspective, see, as a girl growing up, I was looking for examples to look up to. And to be honest, there are far and few. And if at all they were like at a really high level, right? Like if you think about Kiran Bedi, but we all are not going to be Kiran Bedis, right? But we at our own different levels will be who we are. But I was always looking out for such examples, especially earlier on in my career, seeing women who are completely fulfilled, having everything, but that was not always the case. There was always something that was missing. But now I'm seeing that change. I'm seeing that with my counterparts. I'm seeing them taking that effort. I'm seeing families supporting their daughters or daughter-in-laws, husband, wives, everybody coming together to build that success for the women in the family. And I think that, like Poonam was also talking about diversity and inclusion, and I've been seeing these words being thrown around a lot. I hope it just doesn't become another lingo that, that everybody uses, but genuinely some change needs to happen, or there has to be some action that is taken integrally. And I think the most important aspect is empathy, but that is again something that no matter how many policies or rules, regulations you put, even the government passes any bills, till the time there is no true empathy, I'm not sure how much of we are doing would be successful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to the basics, because I think empathy is a conversation that, especially in the pandemic, we've seen so much of an importance in weighing in on. Even brands that have looked at things empathetically have obviously sustained the test of time. And I think that's the same story that we're trying to, in some form, bring into this inclusive workplace that we're clearly chasing, but are we there yet? And there are obviously gaps. So Dimple, coming to my next question for all of you is, we'll bring the lens a little closer to the industry that we are in. There are gaps. They may not be as much because seemingly on the face, I've been told this so many times, the PR industry is full of women. You've got it all. Your industry is aspirational, but there are gaps. What are those gaps and what can we do to address them? And here I'd ask you to, throw in your anecdotes, because I think we need to bust some myths. So let's do that now, ladies.
Yes, happy to. And I think the first thing to do is have honest conversations, which is what we're doing, hopefully. Unless we bring issues to the fore, they'll never be addressed, right? So I think each of us owes that to not just each other, but also to the larger, audiences. I love this one statement that Malala made. She's an advocate for women in education, and she says, I raise my voice not to shout, but to represent those that do not have a voice, right? So I do believe that leaders must take up causes that impact not just them and their teams and their near and dear ones, but really the larger, let's say, segment of society that wants to be in communications, and we can do a bit. I don't think we can say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to change the way the country works. We could, but there is somewhere we start. So if we have to really think about where each of us can really contribute and look at things that need to happen, the first thing really is, yes, women in the workforce, right? I mean, how are we making sure? And you know how communications as an industry has no hours, right? There are no strict contained work hours, especially if you're in the agency side. And also if you're in a very, very, challenging work environment that has a lot of crisis issues, you don't have regular work hours. Then in that case, what are we as as a corporate entity, across agencies, across corporate entities, what are we doing to make sure that other genders have it a little easy, right? Because for men, it's probably a little easier because the kids are equally at ease with the moms, blah, blah. I think a little bit of flexibility on how each one functions, and this is not restricted only to women, also to other genders. I think a lot of flexibility, this work from home construct has worked beautifully. Everyone's ready to go. There's been absolutely no impact on economic activity. There might have been because of restrictions in terms of lockdown, but just in terms of productivity, people realize that spending time where you're not torn for your responsibility is a great way to be. So more flexible constructs, whether it's work constructs, whether it's even convivial work constructs, perhaps there needs to be a little more focus there. The other thing I really wanted to put out there is the training and upskilling, right? Mostly, let me talk first about women and then we'll get to the other genders. Also, women typically will put family first and say, if I had to spend 4 hours, I'd rather spend with family. But there has to be a concerted effort in upskilling and retraining sometimes, because the world itself is evolving around us. And I don't think we do that very proactively and in a very focused and, mindful manner. So whilst in our appraisals, we have that quotient, each one of us does, right? How much time are you devoting to learning? But in every case, I will tell you there's so much more that each one of us should do and could do. So one is that training and upskilling for women in the workforce. But when you look at the larger diverse genders that exist, I don't think they even have access to education sometimes. So what if you're physically, let's say specially abled, and you can't sit in a schoolroom construct, right? There has to be so much more that we do in terms of just imparting. It might not be academic education, but it could be training, upskilling, and special skill sets. Now, is that enough? Perhaps not. Once you create those constructs and you have people that are upskilled and trained, then where are the opportunities where they can actually be, part of the workforce and contribute constructively, positively, and add value to not just their economic status, but also to society.
Yes, absolutely. Some really poignant questions raised there. Dhruti, switching gears to you, I think it's the same question. What are those gaps in our space? What can we do to address them?
So I think every organization, has a code of conduct. So this is really the governing principles on which you need to do. And I do believe that the whole aspect of diversity, inclusion, and even equality need to be built into that code of conduct. It sometimes requires you not to just initiate and leave, but sometimes mandate.
Yes, I think
particularly
short and sweet, but mandate.
Yeah. But particularly in an Indian context.
Mandate. Sometimes culture needs to be engineered. Culture needs to be engineered.
I couldn't agree more with you, Shreya.
Yeah, Poonam, coming to you and asking you to share anecdotes if you have any, and to actually call out those gaps and see what we can do to narrow them.
So, specifically then zeroing down on the industry and the domain that we represent, on the agency side, it's been quite a while since, I have been there. So I think for me, the two things that would probably stand out is what we've already discussed, which is the pay parity, ensuring that there is a parity in the pay structures, and then having very transparent conversations about how do you nurture and grow women leaders. But the other thing which I'm seeing, and which is again probably an offshoot of the fact that we are in a progressive industry, a lot of policies around equal treatment of maternity and paternity leaves, adoption leaves, at the same scale as a maternity leave. I think those are some very progressive things, and it's really heartening to see the PR industry sort of take the lead on that. I think it's interesting, and Shreya had mentioned this, and it's very true. I think right now there are 3 M's, of which marriage and maternity is something that we all acknowledge and talk about. And then there is menopause, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's talking about it, because you think that women have probably burnt out and, exited the workspace, because, that from whatever I read about it and whatever we hear about it, it's not an easy, stage to navigate and transition. And I think, that is probably something that we should, I would actually encourage the industry to think about, that in a more open manner. But just to come back to a personal anecdote, and this is not from a PR industry, it's actually from the startup world, as Shreya mentioned. And sometimes you do the big things, and that's where I really agree with what Dimple and Dhruti also say, that at a personal level you have to, every voice counts, and you have to make your voice heard. So here was this startup that I joined, and it's a very, very micro sort of an example. And they had all these great policies in place. And then there was the women's washroom, which didn't have a dustbin with lids. So I had to go around talking to people about why a women's washroom should have dustbins with lids. And we all know why that should be there. But, it's just one of those things. If you don't have enough, that representation in the system, you don't think of these, everyday problems and challenges and things like that. So which is why, we come back to that point of include and build that slate, and build a representative slate, which is representative to Dimple's point and what we've talked about earlier. All gender, like the non-binaries, there are unique challenges and problems that we have literally no insight into. And until you start talking to them and really having an open dialogue, it's not something we're going to be able to grapple very, very soon. So yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my God. That makes you pause for a moment and think of what representation is. Shreya, coming to you. I am on the hour, so Shreya's comment will be the last one, and I'll wrap it up and hand it back to Anubhuti. So over to you.
Yeah. So I feel that PR agencies, and if you're talking about our industry, are, I think, the beginning where we can actually start experimenting and doing things for women, because majority of the workforce is women. They can be the flag bearers of bringing that change, or at least doing the permutation combinations that are required. And another point taken from both Poonam, Dimple and Dhruti is that I think there is a need for training for the transition phases also that women go through, right? Like if somebody is pregnant, they might think that, okay, I don't know how I'm going to deal with it, or how am I going to go back to workforce. There are a lot of myths. There are a lot of misunderstanding about it. And I think both corporates and organizations can work towards building more education for women as well as to the steps that they can take. So yeah, those are some closing points I have.
What are those steps that you can take, really? And there is a question which we'll answer hopefully on Twitter soon. What type of mentorship is being offered by you all to younger women? I have a lot of answers. I know Dhruti, Dimple, Shreya, Poonam, you all would do. So make sure to tweet those answers to Ganesh. He's asking them. We are up on the hour, and Anubhuti is signaling me. But I think on a wrap of today, I just have to say thank you, Dimple, Shreya, Poonam, Dhruti. We've just barely scratched the surface, just, infinitesimally small way as to what this actually is and means. And hopefully we'll get multiple agencies and platforms to continue this conversation, which is so very relevant and important. Thank you all so much for this one. Anubhuti, handing it back to you. If you all have more thoughts, continue to keep them going on Twitter. Would love to continue to banter up. Thank you so much, ladies. Anubhuti, over to you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shreya. In fact, thought-provoking conversation there. And thank you to all our panelists, Dhruti, Dimple, Poonam, and Shreya, thanks once again.